I knew something was off the second I walked into the file room and heard the sound of shredders humming. Not one, three, all going at once, like mechanical woodpeckers tearing through the spine of our company's memory. I stood there a minute, watching a pair of interns, who couldn't spell retention schedule if it was tattooed on their forearms, stuff documents into the mouth of corporate amnesia. Labels I recognized, tabs I created, signatures I'd notarized myself. The whole room smelled like hot paper and ignorance. I didn't speak, I didn't scream, I just walked out because I knew the exact moment the match hits the fuse, and they'd just lit theirs. 14 years I gave that place. Not in glory or promotion parties, but in the spaces no one notices. The margin notes, the timestamps, the chain of custody forms no one ever asked about, until they needed them. I wasn't flashy, didn't have a standing desk or a wellness app, just a corner cubicle in the East Annex with 2 locking file drawers, a French press, and my own damn label maker. My job wasn't to innovate, my job was to protect, to maintain the legal spine of every federal certification that kept Halbridge Systems from sinking under its own paperwork. And they laughed. They actually laughed. "We're going fully digital," Jill Moreland said, like she was announcing the second coming. New VP of HR, just 6 weeks in and already drunk on buzzwords and budget cuts. Her lipstick matched her iPad case, that's all I remember. Before we go further, quick note. If this story already feels like someone just hit your career anxiety bone with a mallet, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of listeners never do, and trust me, it really motivates the team putting these together. Okay. Deep breath. Now back to Jill, queen of digital disruption. She strolled into my office like she was blessing it with her presence, tapped a few papers with her gel pen like she was too delicate to touch actual ink. "We're streamlining," she said, like my work had been some long-running inside joke. "Redundancies are being dissolved. Honestly, Mara, no one's keeping paper anymore." I looked at her and didn't say a word, just slid open my drawer and handed her a single-page document. It was titled, in bold font she probably thought was aggressive, "Custodian of Record, Offboarding Transition Checklist." Underneath, bullet points outlining where my access ended, what credentials were revoked, and the federal laws attached to improperly handled archival destruction. She smiled at it like it was a coffee shop punch card, dropped it in a tray without reading past the title. "Thanks. We'll scan this in," she said, turning on her heels like I was dismissed. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain how, no, Jill, you cannot legally replace wet signatures on EPA filings with a Dropbox folder. I didn't tell her that my certification wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a regulatory backbone filed with 4 agencies and 6 sub-registries. I simply stood, locked my file drawers, typed one final update to the system log marking my credentials as revoked by third party, a phrase that would later haunt them, and walked out. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I knew what they were walking into. I just didn't care to stop them. Because when people think the paper doesn't matter, they don't realize until it's ash. And trust me, the fire hadn't even started yet. Jill didn't waste time. Barely 2 weeks after that smug little streamlining speech, she was parading around with her digital-first doctrine like she'd cured corporate cancer. They gave her a standing ovation in the all-hands meeting, actual applause, because she promised less paper, faster approvals, and a sleek cloud-first culture. I watched from the back, sipping burned break room coffee, while she clicked through a slideshow filled with icons instead of facts. Slides like goodbye binders and paper is for dinosaurs. No joke. Actual slides. I remember the guy from marketing leaned over and whispered, "You okay, Mara?" Like I was watching my dog get put down. I was more than okay. I was done. See, Jill didn't just target my systems. She ridiculed them. We found a closet with 17 binders labeled Q2 sign-offs, she told the compliance leads, chuckling like it was quaint. I mean, how many signatures do we need, right? I tried to speak. Once. I reminded the room, as calmly as I could, that those binders were our documented compliance trails, that every signature was required by federal chain of custody laws, cross-indexed by timestamp and location, and that their destruction required a formal audit trail signed by the custodian of record, me. Jill didn't even look up from her iPad. "We'll digitize it," she said flatly. "You can scan a signature. Welcome to the 21st century." I didn't argue again. Let the record show, I flagged the risk. I documented the warnings. I wrote a detailed memo and sent it directly to HR, compliance, and legal. Digital modernization. Record Custodianship and Retention Protocols. 7 pages. Annotated. I even attached the federal retention statutes as appendices, like I was prepping them for an open book test they'd never take. Nobody replied. Well, legal replied once. A paralegal, probably 23, shot back a one-liner. Thanks for raising. We'll loop back if needed. Loop back. Like it was a parking lot issue. Like I hadn't just told them they were tossing out the spine of their own credibility. So I stopped explaining. I started preparing. I opened my offboarding checklist doc. Yes, I had one. And began updating the last section. Custodianship transfer and certificate revocation. I marked my certification status as pending reassignment, unverified. I saved copies of every record destruction request I could get my hands on, especially the ones signed off without a counter signature. If they were going to light the match, I was going to make sure I wasn't holding the gas can when it blew. But the worst part wasn't Jill's arrogance or the interns running shredders like it was recess. It was the silence. The sheer, deafening indifference. No one asked what we were losing. No one cared who built the protocols they were erasing. I'd become invisible in the very system I built. A footnote in a company that once trusted me to preserve its past. So I sat in my cube, adjusted the little plaque that said M. Jennings Records Integrity, and printed one last version of the master index. Just in case. Because when the house of cards collapses, someone always asks who pulled the bottom. And I was making damn sure they had my name spelled right. Jill called me into her office like she was about to gift me a spa day. Her voice had that syrupy HR tone people use when they're about to gut you with a smile. Mara, she said, lacing her fingers over a pastel notepad, we've reviewed your position and frankly, it's obsolete. She didn't blink. Digital takes care of everything now. We just don't need a records custodian when there's Dropbox and DocuSign, right? I sat across from her in silence. Let her hear the weight of it. The kind of silence that doesn't plead or argue. It just watches people step off cliffs they built for themselves. Then, without a word, I reached into my leather folio and handed her a single crisp document. Offboarding checklist. Custodian of record transition. I didn't need to say what it was. She didn't need to read it. She let out a little chuckle. Wow, you really had this ready, huh? She flipped it once, glanced at the bolded bullet points, revoke access logs, terminate record authority, deactivate vault index credentials, then tossed it onto a side tray like it was a grocery receipt. We'll scan it in, she muttered, already turning to her laptop. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out. But not before making one last stop. The basement archives weren't glamorous. No sleek glass doors or keycard scanners, just a plain steel door, a keypad, and a cooling vent that always rattled during storms. I'd visited that room more times than I could count over 14 years, but this time, I wasn't retrieving anything. I entered my override code, still active, not that Jill knew, and pulled up the directory server. 3 clicks, 2 warnings, and one final confirmation box later, I disabled the physical archive index interface. Not deleted, just dark, like flipping a breaker on a room no one knew they needed, until the lights didn't come back on. Then I opened my laptop one last time and composed a short resignation email addressed to Jill, legal, compliance, and the VP of operations. It was polite, clean. Attached was a scanned version of my custodian certification, marked revoked per termination, with the date and time of system lockout. I also included a brief note. Please ensure any further handling of physical records complies with CFR Title 36 and Internal Policy 7.4.1a. As of this notice, I am no longer authorized to certify, retrieve, or validate archive integrity. Thank you. I hit send, closed the lid, packed the last of my things. Just a coffee mug, a framed receipt from my first notarized EPA sign-off, and a USB drive that didn't contain a damn thing, but a screenshot of a quote I kept taped to my monitor. Legacy isn't data, it's the name on the dotted line. I didn't cry, I didn't look back, because I knew what was coming, and it wasn't a digital revolution, it was a reckoning. The first cracks showed up quietly, like hairline fractures beneath a coat of fresh paint. At first, it was just a string of polite emails from compliance. Could you please confirm access to the Q3 emissions audit forms? We're unable to locate the original inked copies of Form 960E. Was the archive index updated post-transition? You could almost smell the nervous cologne of denial wafting through the text. They copied legal, Then legal copied HR. Then HR started hitting reply all with phrases like fully digitized per modernization initiative and scanned and stored per new protocol. Problem was, scanned didn't mean certified, and certified didn't mean legal unless my signature was on it. Weeks passed, and the energy inside Halbridge got weird. The hallways that used to buzz with startup optimism now felt like they were waiting for something to hit. I still had friends there, quiet ones, people who knew better than to rock the boat, but also knew what those archives actually meant. One of them texted me a screenshot of an internal Teams chat. Anyone know where the original sign-offs for the T41 exports are? Digital copy says verified, but it's blank where the ink signature should be. HR responded, they're probably just misfiled. We'll locate. But they didn't. Because they couldn't. See, when Jill's digital-first train started rolling, it didn't stop to ask who built the tracks. They shredded binders with nothing but digital placeholders as backup. Placeholder signatures, placeholder timestamps. But placeholders don't hold up when regulators show up with clipboards and fine-tooth combs. And then the announcement came, a formal company-wide notice. In preparation for valuation review ahead of potential acquisition, all departments must verify legacy compliance documentation and provide original certification trails where applicable. Suddenly, people cared about my filing cabinets. Compliance sent 3 urgent requests to HR. Quarterly environmental logs, hazardous material handling sign-offs, a full decade of retention schedules, all documents that lived in the physical archive under my direct custodianship. I imagined Jill sitting in her office, scrolling through her tablet, realizing that digitized PDFs with no ink trail don't satisfy the SEC, the EPA, or any of the 7 agencies tied to a $95 million acquisition review. Still, they played it cool. First, they blamed transitions. Those documents were being scanned during departmental restructuring. Then they blamed logistics. We believed they were reboxed for digital verification. When pressed harder, Jill herself finally chimed in. We're confident any missing files are misfiled, not missing. Misfiled. Like one of the interns accidentally crammed a decade of audit trails into a potted plant and forgot. Only no one was laughing anymore. Not even Jill. One of the internal auditors escalated a note to legal. Multiple certifications missing from digitized archive. No ink signature record. Querying custodian record status. Please confirm authority. I wasn't there to see it, but I know the moment that sentence was read out loud, the air changed. They'd erased me from the system. But they forgot that the system remembered me. And they were about to find out what happens when you delete the person holding the keys without first asking what door they locked behind them. The conference room was glass on 3 sides, sleek, modern, and about to become a crucible. I wasn't in the building anymore, but I knew the setup well enough to picture it. 12 chairs, 1 long table, 3 carafes of stale coffee, and a big monitor showing version control spreadsheets no one actually understood. At the head of the table sat a man in a navy suit with the kind of expression you only get after 20 years of federal audit work and 0 tolerance for PR speak. He didn't smirk, he didn't blink. He just circled something on the document in front of him, tapped his pen twice, and said, "Let's pause right there." You could hear a pin drop. According to a friend in finance who messaged me later with, "Holy hell, Mara, the document in question was the Q2, Q4 certification packet, the one that tied emissions compliance, vendor attestation, and export handling into one neat chain of legal custody, a packet I had assembled, verified, indexed, and signed under my unique custodian credentials. In ink, not in Adobe Acrobat." The auditor looked up, calm but surgical. "Where are the original sign-offs for Q2 through Q4? He asked. Legal glanced at HR. Jill, caught mid-scroll on her tablet, froze. She started, reaching for a binder that didn't exist. "We transitioned to digital recently. The originals were part of the archive optimization. We shredded the legacy files." That last sentence hung in the air like the smell of smoke after a spark. The auditor slowly put his pen down. "You shredded the originals." Jill nodded, hesitantly. "Yes, but everything was digitized. All records were uploaded to our central server." He leaned forward. "Under whose authority were they originally signed?" No one spoke, not even legal, so he asked again, slower this time. "Whose name appears on the wet ink sign-offs for these documents?" That's when the panic started to spread. Legal opened a laptop, A younger associate pulled up the digital index backup, clicking too fast, eyes darting left and right as if the signature would magically appear just because the monitor was brighter. But it didn't. Because it couldn't. Because every one of those signatures was mine, indexed under my certification, my date stamps, my access credentials. And those credentials were revoked the moment Jill dropped my checklist into her tray and told the interns to clear the basement. My friend in finance said it was like watching someone realize they'd bulldozed the foundation of their house to make room for an infinity pool, and now the pool was swallowing the whole damn thing. One of the legal advisors whispered, "Try the backup vault logs," and someone else muttered, "Did she upload to SharePoint?" Jill's hands were shaking slightly now. You could hear her breath catch on every other word. "We'll locate the scanned versions. There must be backups." But it didn't matter. The auditor didn't raise his voice. He just tapped the table once and said, "If there's no original chain of custody, this review cannot proceed as compliant." That's when legal finally stopped clicking, because they all knew what came next. Without original sign-offs, they couldn't validate the audit trail. Without audit trail integrity, the valuation was at risk. And without me, they were already legally underwater. They just hadn't realized how fast the tide was coming in. One by one, the faces around that glass table started to lose color, like someone had drained the blood right through the soles of their shoes. The room didn't erupt in panic, not yet. It cracked in slow motion. Legal was the first to truly understand. A senior counsel named Reynolds pulled up the compliance ledger and started cross-referencing custodian IDs. His voice didn't shake when he spoke, but it landed like a gut punch across the table. The signatory field for all Q2 through Q4 certifications reads Sir Jennings, custodian ID 942A, time-stamped, indexed, non-transferable. Then he added barely above a whisper, she was the sole certified custodian of record. Someone in the back coughed. Jill blinked like the air had just changed pressure. "Okay, but, we digitized everything. Even if we don't have the originals, the scans are still valid, right?" Reynolds turned very slowly. "Not for federal valuation, not for export clearance, not for anything requiring a verified chain of custody. Digitized copies are supplementary. Originals are the standard, and per statute, a custodian's signature must be active and authenticated at time of review." Silence. Absolute. I imagine it like the air getting heavier by the second, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, the hum of the fax system sounding like a death knell. Someone asked, too casually, "Can we reauthorize the signature? Like, have someone else retroactively validate the scans?" A junior lawyer shook her head. "Only the original custodian can do that, or an appointed successor certified prior to the destruction date." The problem was, there was no successor. I'd made damn sure of that. The offboarding checklist Jill had laughed at, it outlined every step necessary for a legal custodianship transfer. And they'd done none of it. Because they assumed my work was ceremonial, that signatures were just aesthetics, that history could be zipped up and dropped into a Google Drive folder. Someone opened their mouth to speak and stopped halfway through. No one knew what to say. Because it wasn't just that the documents were gone. They had erased federal documentation. Certifications tied to regulated activity. Filed reports backed by environmental audits. Export reviews and compliance attestation. Things Halbridge declared to oversight agencies. Things that now no longer had any provable origin. Jill finally broke the silence. "This doesn't mean we're out of compliance," she said, voice tight, eyes scanning for backup. "It just means we need to locate alternate forms. Or maybe reach out to the agencies and explain." Reynolds cut her off. "We certified under penalty of perjury that those records were intact, accessible, validated. That box was checked on 3 different filings, with your name on them." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Across the table, someone started flipping through the backup ledger like they could will a new name into existence. One by one, every certification trailed back to me. The timestamps, the initials, the paper logs, all gone, but not forgotten. And as the regulator sat patiently, waiting for an answer, the gravity of it finally landed. They hadn't fired a records officer. They'd torched their legal foundation, then smiled while it burned. The walls didn't cave in all at once, but the tremor had started, and everyone in that room could feel it. The valuation was bleeding out, and there was no one left with the authority to stop it. The email came in at 8:42 p.m. on a Wednesday. No greeting, no formal header, just a single line from a legal associate I barely remembered. Hi, Mara. Any chance you might have retained backup copies of the Q2, Q4 filings? No subject line, no explanation, just that quiet little plea wrapped in corporate desperation. I sat there at my kitchen counter, chamomile tea cooling beside me, rereading the message like it might transform into something with a spine. It didn't. I closed my laptop without replying. Let them sweat. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, voicemail. Another buzz, then a text. Wait, It's Reynolds from legal. Please call me when you can. Urgent. By the time I returned the call, next day, late morning, I could already hear it in his voice. That hollow, trying to sound calm cadence people use when they're hoping you'll throw them a rope while pretending not to need one. Mara, he said, thank you for calling back. I waited, let him fill the silence. We seem to be having trouble verifying some of the original documents you maintained during your tenure. As you know, the company is undergoing a sensitive valuation review and, well, he cleared his throat. Do you happen to have any archived versions of the sign-offs? Even partial records? Working copies? I didn't sigh, I didn't laugh. I simply said, no. A pause. My archive was internal only. Nothing was exported. The physical files were stored in the on-site vault, indexed through the secure directory. That index was tied to my active credentials, which, as of my offboarding, were revoked. Your team terminated access. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, he said carefully. That's understood. We just thought, given the circumstances, perhaps you... I don't operate outside policy, I interrupted. You know that. Silence. I could hear the quiet clicking of his pen on the other end. Maybe someone else listening in. Maybe Jill, face down in her desk, pretending this was salvageable. But I wasn't done. By the way, I said, you may want to check with your buyer about how they feel reviewing an incomplete audit trail, especially now that their legal team has joined the valuation calls. The words fraud by omission came up last year in a very similar case. Reynolds exhaled through his nose. Mara, he said quietly, we're just trying to mitigate damage. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I did my part, I said. Everything was documented, properly signed, properly stored. You didn't lose it, you threw it away. I hung up before he could thank me, because thanks didn't mean anything at this point, and gloating, that wasn't necessary. The silence I left behind was louder than anything I could have said. They didn't announce it with sirens or slamming doors. It came quietly, like everything else meaningful in corporate America, a line buried 3 paragraphs deep in a revised merger timeline. Pending further review of documentation integrity, the acquisition process has been temporarily paused. Paused. That word hit harder than terminated. Terminated could be blamed on budget shifts or strategic pivots, but paused? That meant they saw something. That meant someone had opened a drawer labeled assumptions and found it empty. It didn't take long for the regulators to echo the same concerns. Within days, 2 separate oversight agencies submitted formal queries to Halbridge's legal team, requesting verification of original signatory documentation related to quarterly audits and export protocols for fiscal year, one letter read. Another went further. Disclosure review indicates possible breach of record retention standards. Please provide chain of custody evidence. And when no one could, the risk disclosures ballooned. By week's end, the valuation risk report had a new line item, potential regulatory penalties related to lost chain of custody documentation, right there in black and white, next to breach of compliance and operational exposure. That's when the board started demanding emergency briefings. One director, according to someone I trust, said it flat out in a closed-door session. If we can't trace 1 year of our own paperwork, what else is hidden under that rug? Then came the trade press. First, it was a single blog post on a compliance newsletter, nothing big, just a bullet point. Halbridge deal may stall due to custodial failure. But the next morning, it showed up in the finance dailies. By afternoon, a tech ethics podcast aired an episode called Digital Disasters and the Myth of Paperless Trust. It had a thumbnail of a shredder chewing through money. The optics were unraveling. Investors started calling. And in the middle of all that noise, tucked away between funding alerts and acquisition chatter, a small press release hit the wire. We are pleased to welcome Mara Jennings to our Compliance Authority office. Mara brings over a decade of custodial expertise in regulatory documentation and will oversee signatory integrity and retention operations effective immediately. No fanfare, no fireworks, just a line of text. But I saw it. So did they. And somewhere in that glass-walled panic room, I hope Jill finally understood. I wasn't just some dusty artifact from a pre-digital world. I was the signature under their credibility. I didn't celebrate. I didn't send anyone a smug email or post a cryptic LinkedIn update. I just walked into my new office the following Monday, hung up my coat, and opened a binder. A real one. Labeled, indexed, and verified. Because some things don't need reinvention. They just need someone who knows not to throw them away. The emergency meeting was held on a Friday. That was the first mistake. Never hold a reckoning before a weekend. It gives people too much time to stew in the consequences. They flew the auditor back in. Same navy suit, same calm expression. He didn't bother with niceties this time. Just flipped through a thin folder of compliance printouts, placed it squarely on the conference room table, and looked at the group over his glasses. "Where are the originals?" he asked. Not in anger, not even curiosity, just confirmation. Silence followed like a pulled fire alarm. Everyone was there. The board, legal, compliance, the remnants of HR. Jill sat near the corner, smaller than usual, face unreadable. For a moment it looked like someone might answer. Then Reynolds from legal cleared his throat, quietly folded his hands, and said the words that sealed it. Every one of them was under her authority. The phrase landed like a blade across the table. The CEO didn't argue, he didn't demand clarification or point fingers. He just looked down at the edge of the table, lips pressed tight, eyes dark with the weight of 100 bad decisions wrapped in one bad hire. One by one, the leadership team realized what had just been said aloud, in front of the auditor no less. They hadn't just lost documents, they'd invalidated years of federal filings. And more importantly, they'd proven to the acquiring firm that their internal controls were built on arrogance, not integrity. Within 48 hours, the buyer returned with an amended proposal. The $95 million offer was slashed. Rumors flew, some said $30 million cut, some said more. What mattered was the message. We're not paying premium for fiction. The board accepted. They didn't have a choice. Jill was quietly reassigned by the end of the month. Not fired, of course. That would imply fault. She was moved to a strategic advisory role, which is HR speak for sit in this quiet corner until we forget you exist. No farewell lunch, no LinkedIn balloon post. And me, I kept working. In my new office, sunlight hits just right in the mornings. There's a small coffee machine on the credenza, and across from my desk hangs a framed quote etched in brushed steel. "Integrity is remembering what you signed." But it's the plaque on my door that says it all. Custodian of record, Jennings M. No embellishments, no marketing flair. Because in the end, legacy wasn't in the papers. It was in the name under every one of them.